Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday forum featuring Barbara Coombs Lee, President of Compassion and Choices. We will return to our speaker in a minute for our traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to formulate your questions now and remind you to keep them brief and to the point. We welcome you to this City Club forum. Our greetings go to those present in this room, and especially those who are guests. We hope you will join the City Club and become an active member in our ongoing civic dialogue. Today is the City Club's David Ralph Hertz Forum on Civil Liberties, made possible by a special memorial gift from Mr. Hertz's widow, Marguerite Rosenberg Hertz, his sons Harlan and Willard, and a host of friends, including a major contribution by David Myers and the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. We are pleased to welcome guests today at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler and the Cleveland Memorial Society. Thank you for joining us. Today's program is sponsored by the Cleveland Memorial Society. With us today at the head table are Linda Betzer, President of the Cleveland Memorial Society, and Bill McCullum, Vice President of the Cleveland Memorial Society. Will you both please stand and be recognized for your support? We are pleased to welcome to our forum today students who are here as part of our City Club student program. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous grant from the Loeb Foundation. With us today are students from the Cleveland School of Science and Medicine. Would our guests please stand and be recognized? Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are City Club PR and Programs Manager Carrie Miller and Assistant Director of Development Marcella Brown. Our first question, please.
Ms. Combs, I guess I have a simple question, but I think there's a more complicated background. What is your guess about whether the code to permit the once every 5 years consultation with the doctor around dying decisions essentially will remain in the health care bill or will get implemented in some other way? And frankly, why does it need to be done legislatively? It would seem to be something you might do administratively.
Apparently not. Apparently the Medicare system and the regulation of it at HHS is such that adding codes, adding reimbursement for different services requires an act of Congress. I'm actually quite optimistic that it will remain. I talked with Congressman Blumenauer, who is the congressman from Oregon who introduced that, and he is really quite optimistic. It is in the bill as it will be voted on in the House of Representatives. And as I said, I think that you'll see some reinvigoration of the charges about this is all a plot to eliminate the disabled and to speed the deaths of our senior citizens. But there's been so much commentary and so much debunking of those charges that I don't see them actually having an impact. So I'm pretty optimistic that it will happen. It's a small step, but it is a step.
Ms. Lee, you spoke of the lady who ended up 10 days in the ICU despite her best efforts to plan ahead. Click and Clack, in responding to questions about why am I getting such a huge bill, have sometimes responded that the mechanic must have had a boat payment to make. How much of the resistance to palliative care and sensible end-of-life issues do you feel are motivated simply by the hospital's desire to keep that $10,000 a day coming in for the ICU?
There certainly is a financial component to all of this. That's not where we concentrate our efforts. For us, the tragedy is in suffering, is in making dying patients endure suffering for futility, for treatments that are invasive and painful and futile and do nothing but torture the patient as they're dying and torture the loved ones who are observing it. Oh, by the way, that futile, ineffective, painful care is also extraordinarily expensive. That's true. That's not where we focus. We focus on the shame of it for the suffering that it visits upon so many people. I mean, the truth is that 80% of Americans die in intensive care units. Ask anyone, what is, knowing that you will face death at some point, what is your ideal death? And 90% say, at home, in my bed, among the things that I love, and the people who love me, hopefully right there in bed with me. But that is not the death that 80% of Americans get. Something must be done. I think that there will be a lot of cost savings when all of that futile, expensive care goes by the wayside, but intense suffering will always also go by the wayside, and that's our focus.
Ms. Lee, you mentioned two states, Washington and Oregon, which both have aid in dying statutes that have been adopted, confirmed by the people in those states. You have a personal involvement, I understand it, in Oregon, possibly in Washington as well. I'd be very interested in hearing from you what it is about the people who live in those two states, in Washington and Oregon, that made it possible for them to adopt this progressive, what I regard as progressive legislation. And do you see any indication of similar types of grassroots organizations throughout the country and doing the same thing as Washington and Oregon did?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Compassion Choices, my organization, is the prime mover and major player behind those ballot initiatives, particularly the one in Washington this last November. These things don't spring, from the ground and be successful. It takes an enormous amount of coordinated effort and political expertise and money to bring a successful ballot initiative to the people. Approximately $5 million was spent by our side, and about 5 years of effort working up to that ballot initiative in Washington in November of 2008. There are other ways. Not every state has an initiative process. Not every state has a population that is quite so overwhelmingly supportive as Oregon and Washington's, although Gallup has been polling on this since 1947, and he has never found that only a minority of people believe that dying people who are competent should be able to ask their doctors for life-ending medication. The answer to that question has always been overwhelmingly the majority say yes, that should be a right. In some years as high as 70% all over the country. There are other ways to change the law and to legitimize and bring this practice out from the covert, clandestine status that it is in other states. And Montana is one example of how we did it by, we think that, well, we are cautiously optimistic. The Supreme Court in Montana has not ruled yet, but we have a district court ruling that says that Montana's unique constitutional provision that guarantees every Montanan the inviolable right to dignity covers aid in dying. And so aid in dying cannot be criminalized in Montana. So that's another way. And we are diligently, fastidiously looking at the various states and various legal means that we could legalize aid in dying, decriminalize it, make it integrated into normal medical care.